How's the event been so far? Good? Good? Yeah? We've got some people that are still moving at least. All right. Well, we'll try to go quick here to keep things caught up and on schedule. We'll also, though, try to give you some good tidbits. Today's, it's not going to be an innate sales pitch or anything like that. This is going to be more of kind of a reflection on the last what I would say roughly 13 to 15 years of life for me as far as digital transformations have been concerned. But we're going to start it off with a quiz. So all of you who are in here, great. You get to start off with our first quiz question. Finish this statement. Growth solves everything. Growth solves, or all problems was the way the original quote was written. Growth solves everything. Except when it doesn't, right? And so that's what we're going to take a look at here today. We're going to take a look at when growth actually doesn't solve everything. In fact, when large growth or big projects or things that happen to us fast cause more problems than they do solutions. So that's our goal today. But before we get into that, again, a little bit just about me and kind of where I came from so that we can level set where some of these stories are going to come from. First off, that's my family. I'm a father first. We have 4 kids, husband as well, and that was just a few weeks ago. Our oldest is in college. Our twins are 9, so that kind of gives you the range. But I started out, like many of you, coming out of school, fancy new full-time job, and I went to work for a little-known contractor called Kiewit. Anybody heard of Kiewit? A couple people, okay. So that's who I went to work for. Don't hate me, I went to the vertical building side of the company, so I only worked in Omaha. You probably didn't know us very well. But about 5-6 years later, Kiewit realized it's 2010 and we have a DOS estimating system. Something's wrong. Like that's not a sustainable option. So they decided to undergo a digital transformation, and I raised my hand as one of the weirdos that thought that would be a fun project to work on. So I volunteered for that, and that was kind of my first foray into how we change technology at a grand scale. Well, then Google called, said, hey, we've got kind of a big construction budget across the world. We're building all these data centers. We want you to help us find a technology solution to manage it. Believe it or not, Google's multi-billion-dollar data center construction program was run in spreadsheets. Who would have thought, right? And so, specifically Google Sheets, if you're wondering. So we went and did that. And then I've also been with Innate for a while and helped multiple customers kind of walk through this over and over. But essentially what this did is this allowed me to kind of have a front row seat to some of the issues or the problems that are created by large growth, specifically when it comes to technology, and how can we solve for that? So the goal for today is to take a look at some of the ways that we can avoid some of these problems, or at least avoid some of the roadblocks or pitfalls that some of my experience led through. So we're going to take a look at exactly what roles are required for optimal change management, how to effectively dissect processes to understand where automation may be helpful, and also what are good ways to start peeling back the onion of what is construction technology or capital project management software, and see what technologies are good to evaluate or how to even start looking for them. But at the end of all this, the one thing that will be most important, and we'll reiterate this when we get to the end, actually the order in which you attack each one of these problems is the most important part. You have to do it in the right order. And so that's our goal for today. And we're going to dive right in. So growth solves all problems except, well, what's one thing that hypergrowth can do with people? If it were a perfect world, right, you would onboard the right people to the right roles, right? That's what we would all hope to do. And their role would be clearly defined. Who here has a clearly defined role where they work? Right? Okay? Buy-in would be across the board. Everybody would be 100% bought into your purpose. But what happens when you're growing quickly or when things need to be filled quickly? Well, that's the number one thing that happens. We fill the gaps as fast as possible. And at the same time, the role is ever evolving, right? Oh, we found out we need somebody to do this, and now this, and now this. And so these roles evolve, and we disperse our top talent often too soon, right? We find those top performers, and maybe we have a group of them working together, and they're super efficient, but we send them out to try to make efficiencies elsewhere, and it bogs down the whole system. And of course, buy-in initially is based on the excitement, but when buy-in is about excitement and not about purpose, it starts to wane, right? So these are some of the issues that can drum up when you're growing fast, or a large project came out of nowhere, or you're getting big funding and you're going to go chase this big program, but maybe we don't have the right roles in place. But also, it can mess up our processes, because in a perfect world, every person understands how they fit. And we already talked about this a little bit, that roles aren't quite clearly defined, but also where am I in the workflow? Key steps contribute to end results. There's not duplication. There's not multiple people doing the same thing. And it's easily measured for improvement. We can Six Sigma this thing, right? So a lot of times in a perfect world, we're able to find that. In a not perfect world, it's harder. And of course, we'd love constant feedback loops. We'd love to provide feedback. But what happens when we're growing fast and we got to get moving? Just get it done, man. Like, doesn't matter. Just get it done. I don't care about the process. I don't care about this. Just get it done. And so that's what starts to happen when you see these large growth impacts. So then what's it do to the technology? We saw what it did to the people. We saw what it did to processes. Well, again, in a perfect world, your technology would enable your process, right? Like, that's kind of the dream that everybody has. And it would automate things. We would have less manual entry, less email chains, those sorts of things. Also, people would receive the training that they needed. Another show of hands, who got all the training they ever needed on the software that they had to use at work, right? And then lastly, data is available for measurement, so we can create good dashboards off of this stuff. But during hypergrowth, or when we're moving quickly, again, requirements aren't clearly defined. So we're not exactly sure what we need for a software solution. We just know we need one. Let's get it done. And people in the processes are second thoughts. One of my favorite things, we sat down with a company at and we were sitting down with the contractor and asking them, so why are you talking to us? Why are you looking? Well, we need apps. Okay, why? Well, because the kids want apps and we need apps. Great. Why? So, the processes are kind of a second thought there, and specific issues get solved one by one. So you solve a problem over here for this particular department, you get a software implemented, then you go over here and you've got a different problem and you solve their software issue, and then you come over here and you got a new software problem, and now you've got all these different solutions, and sometimes they do the same thing, or sometimes you realize, well, your problem sounds kind of like their problem. Let's try to get their solution to do your stuff, right? And so the tech doesn't do something it was actually built for. So those are some of the problems that growing fast, or getting a big project right out of the gate, or trying to move quickly, those are the issues that stem up. So how do we solve these issues? Well, it starts with the who. And yes, the Pinball Wizard's one of my favorite songs too, but not that who, right? Half the room got that joke. It starts with the people. And who are the right people? Like, what kind of people do we need if we want to go and we want to do this the right way? Well, first and foremost, you need people that are influential with their coworkers. We're not talking about CEOs that are just going to stand up there and beat drums, right? We're talking about people that have a little bit of sway and a little bit of impact on their coworkers. It might just be a type A personality, or it might just be someone who's likable. Sometimes it's the high achievers that are lower in the ranks that are looking for a voice, but maybe aren't quite ready to be promoted yet. Those are good people to go after when you're looking at what should we do about fixing our software solution. Obviously, tech savvy is kind of a good thing, but not in the way that they need to be able to code things on the back end. They just need to be able to pick something up and intuitively start to use it, right? It's not super heavy, but it's not the people that you're just trying to find something to do for. So this is one of the first lessons learned. When we were at Kiewit and we were engaging in this digital transformation, it's 2010, and we need people to go to Omaha to sit down and analyze our software. And I told you I was one of the weird people that raised their hands. There were very few of us that volunteered for that role. So when that happened, people started going around and saying, well, we need you to send us people. And the districts were like, well, we could get this guy off our job, or this gal could go. Let's send them to Omaha, make them do it. Well, what happens when you send these people that you don't want running work to analyze solutions to run work? They don't exactly give you good answers. So it's not those kind of people that you're looking for if you want to look for a digital solution. So what kind of roles should these people have? Same sort of thing. Who are the right people, but what should you call them? One of the things that we try to talk about a lot is a change manager. And there are a number of places where you can get certified for this. I just put one up there that we tend to use. But someone that can kind of be the project manager for the internal software project. That's a good thing to have. The executive sponsor is important, but we'll talk about just in a little bit. Their role is different than you assume their role is. Business process owners or subject matter experts, you've probably heard of these before. People who understand the process that you're trying to digitize would be helpful. And or super users, that's another term people use for that. But this is the other one that's hard for people. It's not in addition to their current role. Because let me ask you this. What happens when you get a pet project at work? Is it the first thing you work on every day? Or is it the first thing you push to the side to make sure you get the urgent things done right now? So it has to be something where you're willing to maybe set aside a couple of people to dedicate to that. And this is what Google did wrong. Because I can't tell you how hard it was to try to schedule a demo of different project management systems when the project manager, who was the key stakeholder, had to run the job, right? Had to manage their contractor at the data center site. Getting him involved was very, very difficult. So it starts with the people. And then you have to take those people and you have to create that buy-in, right? We talked about the buy-in being a struggle. Buy-in is more than that executive sponsorship because it starts with what's in it for me. That's why the influential coworker is a lot more important than the executive sponsor, because the influential coworker can explain in my terms why this is good for me. Why is this technology advancement good for me? And can also build awareness of the benefits. Again, the executive sponsor is looking for the output. Who, when it comes to a software solution that you're implementing, it's usually the lower levels that are responsible for the input, right? Doing the actual work. And so building awareness with them is important, and then sharing regular updates. See, what happens is the executive sponsor is for getting their peers on board. That's what you need the executive sponsor for. Their job is to make sure that the rest of the executives buy in and there's no factions that are trying to avoid said change because the executive's not fully bought in. It's the people that are going to be using it that'll be important. And then you've got to invite feedback, and no, I don't mean this kind of feedback. Got to invite real feedback throughout the process and involve those people at all levels. So that's how we handle the people. And I apologize, I said I was going to go fast because we only have so much time, and I want to try to keep you caught up. But we'll take some questions toward the end too if you need to. But after the people, then it's about analyzing the what, why you do what you do, right? So your processes are all about making success repeatable. And it's interesting because a lot of people look at this idea of digitization or digital transformations and it scares them a little bit. But you got to remember, it's been done before. How many of you have moved away from paper on the projects that you're building within your program? A lot of you, right? So most of us have moved away from paper. Please tell me you've moved away from faxes. Right? Long time ago. But I remember that day. I was sitting in a war room getting bids by fax machine, right? Many of you have probably moved on from your internal servers and are using something like Office 365 or AWS or Google Cloud, right? You're using a cloud environment instead. You've digitally transformed already and you don't even know it. And some of these were probably easier for some of you than others. Some of them might have been difficult. But doing things the XYZ way, right? Doing things the Google way or doing things the Kiewit way or the Caltrans way or you name it. Doing things that way developed over time. And so how do we make that repeatable? How do we keep this in a way that we can keep doing it? Because the most dangerous thing is to try to stay the same, right? We never want to stay the same. And you want to continue to evolve with the ever-increasing complexity of your projects. So, we're going to have to do this again. We're going to have to change with the people. We're going to have to change with the technology around us, and we're going to have to change with market conditions. How do we do that? We evaluate our processes, especially the ones that have become less and less useful as time goes on. And we have honest conversations with ourselves. First and foremost, is this step necessary? So you've got a process flow chart now for the way you do business when you're managing capital projects. Are all these steps necessary? Like, what are our key focal points? This is another place where Google had a real big problem because in their stage gate process for getting a new data center approved, there were 4 gates with a minimum of 30 documents per gate, all with their own approval workflow. How did those get there? Most of them came from getting burned one time on one job, right? Or on one project. So we have to take a look at, are they all relevant? And we have to identify the bottlenecks. 3 of the gates had the same document, and it had to run through the same workflow 3 different times. And that one person took a 3-month vacation. They call them sabbaticals at Google. I don't know if you've heard of that term. I've never heard of that term. But that created a big problem, right? Especially when there were multiple projects in multiple gates, and all 3 of them relied on that one person. So you got to find those bottlenecks, lean out those approval processes that ballooned over time, and most importantly, ask if this step is a limitation of the current software you're using. My favorite one is we sit down with people and they're like, yeah, but now I've got to export that and email it over to procurement. No, you don't. You just hit submit and it goes. Like, they work in the same system too. There's no export button. You don't do that, right? So ask if the step is a limitation of the current tool. And this is where I thought I had this bullet earlier. You guys probably saw me pause. The most dangerous phrase in all of business is, we've always done it that way, right? And that's a Forbes quote. You don't have to quote me on that. So, last thing. That's weeding out the processes. Well, now let's go find the technology. How do we find technology? If we just did a Google search, we're going to have a list of hundreds of things. Well, first, it might be smart to know what are your must-haves. So, go after the tasks that you have that take the most time. Focus on those first. What are the most manual or take the most time? And see if you can automate those. Don't sweat the small potatoes. Like, I'd prefer a blue button, not a green button. I don't like green. I want the button to be blue. Why? It doesn't matter, right? Remember that the tech is meant to enable the process, right? So look for things that help support the process and enable your people to move things forward. And humans and tech can coexist. What's the number one fear of digital transformation? Oh, they're getting rid of my job. They're trying to automate me, right? That's what people are afraid of. No, it's not about getting rid of your job. Tech is not a replacement of the people. It's efficiency. Let's do more with less errors, right? Let's automate steps that were manually done. We have a customer that for the last 30 years, they had a metric that was revenue per FTE, amount of money we made per FTE. For 25 to almost 30 years, it was stagnant, same number every year. In the last 5 years, it's gone up 30%. They didn't fire people, they got more done. That's all it is, right? And the right tech attracts top talent. What's one of the things the industry is struggling with now more than ever? A labor shortage, right? Well, if you're fighting for people already, having paper on your projects is one really quick way to fight even harder, right? And you can let the industry assist you. Many of you have contractors on your jobs. What do they know? Some of your people came from contractors or came from engineers or came out of school. What do they know? What have they used, right? So ask your people. Ask for best practices from your contractors or your vendors. What are they using? Network around this room, right? Obviously there's vendors out there, but ask your peers in this room. What have you used? What have you found, right? These are ways to start to trim that list of hundreds of search results on Google down to results that matter. And then don't forget to let tech help you lean out the process, right? So sometimes these tech solutions might skip a few steps that you're used to. Go back to that honest question, well, was that step necessary? Or was it a current limitation of where I was before? Can I learn from the experience? Because there's a bunch of providers out there that have been doing this for a lot of years. If none of their other customers have asked for that particular step, why are you, right? And break that "we always did that" mold. Out of the box, this is kind of a key thing for a lot of people. Out of the box when possible. I know everybody loves to configure and customize and do all that stuff because you do things very special, and I get that. But the more you configure and the more you customize, the harder it becomes to update. Remember, we want to make this success repeatable. If the software company pushes an upgrade and you configured the heck out of the thing, it breaks half the stuff. That makes it hard. You got to go in and refix all that, right? So that out of the box as much as possible will help you avoid some of those struggles. But again, this was the most important point of the whole thing, so you can forget everything I just said if you remember this one thing today. And there are some innate notebooks on your desk. You can write this down. Grab one of those, take them with you. There's a couple up front for the people who like to sit in the back. And there weren't enough, but order of operations matters. It is people first, then processes, then technology. This order is vitally important. Identifying the right people first is key. Remember, that's what we kind of did wrong the first time at Kiewit. We had to restart 2 years later. And it took 4 years instead of 2 years to do what we expected to do. Understanding the requirements of how you do business comes next. And then it's about the technology enabling that process. And this is where Google really had problems. Because at the end of the day, the people selected a technology. They went to a third-party consultant and asked them to do a review, and they selected the same technology. But an internal development team wanted something that was heavily customizable and configurable because it was their job security. And so they changed the weighting scale so that the software in third place would win, and they had work to do. So they picked the technology first. And after a year of working with it, the people revolted, and they're ripping the whole system out and starting over, which is expensive. So finding balance to these three, though, is your key to longevity. As one leg of the stool changes, like the industry migrates toward cloud as an example, right? The others need to kind of shift with it, and you kind of keep this as an iterative process. But always remember that throwing tech at people just for the sake of digitalization is the wrong way to do it. So if you're some of those companies that I've talked to today that are right on the cusp of doing this big transformation, there's your order of operations. Start with your people. Talk to them first. So real quick, we took a look at some of the problems that fast growth, big projects can bring forth, and then we walked through the solutions of how to work with the right people, dissect our processes, and then look for technology to evaluate. But again, if you wrote down one thing from the whole thing, do it in that order: people first, then processes, then technology. I apologize, that was about as lightning fast as I could do because I don't want you all to have to stay here all night long. But any questions? All right. Oh, yes. Yeah, the real world example that is easiest to point to in both cases at Kiewit and Google is we had wrong people up front. We had people that we were trying to, they weren't really busy running projects, so they got volunteered to go work on this. They didn't want to, they wanted nothing to do with it. And so that created poor attitudes, right? That made it harder to manage. And if they're not some of your superstars, they don't really know what your secrets were or your secret sauce was, so trying to find the right requirements was difficult. So those were the things that kind of fell through. So we had to start over by asking for a new set of people. So we went back to the drawing board and said, hey, we need different folks so that we can lean this out. And when we did that, we kind of came back with a better plan the second time through and got it implemented. And by the third try, because they did it in pieces, by the third try, we had the cream of the crop to pick from because they had figured it out. And the last group to go live, the last third of the company to go live went overnight instead of having to do it iterative for multiple months. Yep. Yeah, so like either it's their secondary job or they don't want to be there to begin with, right? They're somebody you're just trying to find. So at Google, where it was their secondary job, they just never made time for it. And so we were constantly trying to reschedule meetings and try to get people on the board, and then we couldn't get people into the meeting, and then they were watching recordings and we couldn't get their feedback. And so they when they're dedicated to that particular offering, that makes a huge difference. Yep. All right. Thank you.